Thanks very much, Lynn. I think a number of our contributors from the sort of voluntary and community sector have made a very powerful point about the kind of access that they perhaps have to groups and individuals, and that trust that sometimes it better exists. There's Citizens Advice as a national brand, well recognised and with a high level of confidence in it. There is a natural suspicion sometimes of the council, and sometimes people don't open up to us and tell us all the facts because they have, if I'm frank, a deep suspicion that we're also enforcers as well as the providers of support and advice. So that's why the voluntary sector are particularly valuable in this partnership. But I've asked Andrea if she could give an update on where things are, because as I mentioned right at the very beginning, we constantly, and I use the analogy of the well, throughout COVID, whether it's been the Ukrainian crisis and now cost of living, we go to our voluntary sector partners and say, can you just, and they invariably in Bassetlaw do, but we can't take that for granted. And I'd like to hand over to Andrea to give an update on the perspective from the BCVS about the sector in Bassetlaw.
Thank you, Steve. How long have I got? Because we're just coming 4 minutes.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. I changed. Okay. Lovely. Thank you. Well, hello everybody. I think we're afternoon now, aren't we? Oh no, we're not. Still, good morning. I had a 15-minute slot, but we're into 5 minutes, so this is going to be a canter. It might not be that fast. And you've heard from colleagues, sadly, the impact, the significant impact on individual citizens and service users in great detail. And even those that know much of that already, I think you're going to go away feeling really sober after this. It's fairly overwhelming, isn't it? And I'm not here to talk about that, actually. I'm here to talk about the impact on our sector, the voluntary sector. And we work very closely with partners in the public sector. But our sector, as Steve has said, has been actively involved in the response. Before I do that, for those of you that can, I just want you to take your left hand, is that my left hand? And don't worry, if you've got injuries, don't do it. And stretch over your right shoulder. And this is what I asked our organisation to do last year. Stretch as far as you can. Just hold it for a minute. And then I said, and some of you have done this before, now stretch a bit further. How far can you go? And we all did that. And that was the challenge last year. And that was to wake us all up after all the stats as well. The challenge for our sector is we've stayed in that extended stretch position for a good year and more now. And I would say some of our sector is at breaking point. So I'm not here, sadly, to bring good news, but I will start and end with a lighter note perhaps, and that is Eid Mubarak, Happy Eid for anybody celebrating today or yesterday. It's a time of celebration in the world, and I think we need to protect time to communicate and value that and be more inclusive of our diverse communities. And also Happy Pride Month. It's Pride Month. Get the rainbow flags out. So that might be the only light note till I go later in the presentation. But it is important, and I'm also not here today to talk about our employee wellbeing, but as Steve mentioned at the beginning, it's a critical part of maintaining the resilience of our sector to support and maintain the resilience of our staff and our volunteers. And if we don't, the impact of all of this will be only so much harder on our organisations and the people we work with. So we spent quite a lot of time on that in BCVS. We're happy to share those resources with you. So, what I am here to talk about mainly is data. This is our ecosystem, or an image, one of many images of our sector ecosystem in Bassetlaw. It's large, it's diverse, it's very well connected, and you've heard a lot about that today. That infographic just really, actually, specifically represents the social prescribing pathways, but there are many other infographics that show the connectivity across our area, and that is our mission. We're here to make and help the sector to be stronger and sustainable. And a lot of what we do focuses on that. We also are involved in many of the interventions you've heard about, that I'm not here to talk about, cost of living booklet, food hub development, and colleagues around the room have been integral in developing those. These were the it's moved. These were the next steps, so you can't read that and I won't read them out, but these were the next steps that Steve and I presented following the non-summit last year to the chair and CEO of the ICB, that's the Integrated Care Board for Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, in October. And we have delivered and we are delivering as a sector in a partnership against those. This is the BCVS strategy, and I don't expect you to read this, but the point is to highlight 3 issues, or 3 of our goals in here are integral to enabling successful delivery of our cost of living response. And that's number 2, which is to secure sustainable growth in funding for the voluntary sector. That's essential. As funding drops, we've got to support our sector to bring more money in to respond to the needs we've heard about. 5 is increase and diversify the number of volunteers. We know from lots of national research the number of volunteers is reducing. Partly, well, for many reasons actually, but partly as well because of cost of living. People that could afford to volunteer can't. The different models become a barrier. The more paid work people have to do, the more health and well-being impact there is on their well-being, the less able they are to volunteer. So that's a massive issue for our sector. And number 7 is about data. So this is the juicy bit. And I raised Robert, and I think I'll probably win the prize for the worst presentation. I am in great envy of the interactive dashboards that Chris was showing, and I love data, but this isn't going to be a good demonstration of that. So I'm going to do a really whistle-stop tour through the national data for our sector, a little bit of it anyway, and then what we're doing about it, because you've heard from colleagues, health data, local authority, public sector data, large BCSE organisations, they have the ability to extract and segment at a hyper-local level. Generally, the large pieces of research done for our sector don't do that, and that's something that needs to change. Because if we don't have that local insight for our own sector, we can't use our resource more effectively, in a more targeted way, in a data-informed way, and we don't have that data to support those bids and asks for more funding. And that will be key to lever in that additional funding to meet this response. This is almanac data conducted by NCVO every year, the state of the sector. And this is the only level you can extrapolate at a district level. And what this tells us is the national picture is, compared to 2021, the data set published at the end of 22 shows less money for the sector and fewer charities in the sector. Charities are going to the wall. What we can't do is dig down any deeper into that data set because it's not cut in that way. Just last week, I think, and on Monday, there was a presentation about the latest barometer survey. And this is a national survey done by NAFCA, Pro Bono Economics, and NTU. This is actually an interactive dashboard, so I get very excited playing with this, but it's just a photo of it. I'll have to have a go at trusting technology to play with it on screen more next time. What this piece of work does is it will enable us to filter on a regional basis. So this is the East Midlands filter on this data, showing what the issues are at the moment for our sector. This was conducted and published in May actually, but just gone live in the last week or so. This is the 3rd wave of data. The 4th wave will be September. So one of the things we're doing as BCVS to try and get better data out of data sets and research that are already being done, and therefore maximise the impact of that resource, is talk to those organisations and say, can you please build into your design filters at district level? And some will say, no, not yet, can't do it, and some will say, okay, we're open to having a conversation. And NTU is one. So we're talking to them now about doing segmentation for Bassetlaw as a pilot for district level segmentation next time. And that's a piece of work that already happens and will give us that insight. What it's telling us on here at a regional level actually mirrors pretty much the national picture for East Midlands. And that is that there is, apologies, move away from them, that there are, I said last time I stood here, I'd buy some bifocals, so I keep having to do this, but I still haven't, so glasses off. So expected financial position in the next 3 months, the big picture there really is it's going to deteriorate. And this is after a big drop at the beginning of this financial year. This is in year. So our sector is losing money, whilst, as you've heard, in great detail, demand is going through the roof. I'm going to skip through these next two because there's a link here and we'll circulate this and you can dig into this data yourself. But it's telling us that one of the biggest concerns is volunteering for all voluntary groups, and particularly the 3 different bars there, or the small charities on the far right. Biggest concern, pink, last survey, is volunteering. In addition to that, and this is one of the challenges of national data, there are trends nationally that may not reflect our reality in Bassetlaw, and this is why we need local data. This report that was published was about going into reverse, I think. That was the name of the report. Actually, the data isn't showing that, and it's certainly not telling us that in Bassetlaw, qualitatively or quantitatively. We're not going into reverse. We're not seeing a drop in demand. We're seeing a slowed increase in demand as an aggregate nationally. And we hear qualitatively, we're seeing, as you've heard, and quantitatively, locally, demand is going through the roof. So if these kind of research reports and this data is informing national policy and funding coming into our sector, it's not going to help us. It's really important that we get that accurate local data to enable us to do more with what we have. So Bassetlaw, BCVS with partners have run a couple of, well many actually, small surveys to help add to that local picture. This was one we did in February and March, and this was particularly around 9 organisations actually, plus 1, who'd lost funding, and the impact it was going to have on our local citizens and our population. And this is what it told us at that time. It told us a lot more than this, but those 2 key numbers were really powerful. Over 3,000 service users, they wouldn't be able to support them, and a further 8,500 would be indirectly affected. This highlights the importance of data because we've been able to use this data with our public sector partners who are so supportive. We've heard that time and time again, but unusually so. I've worked in many regions, in many localities, and it is unusually strong in this district. It is amazing. So we've worked collectively to try and mitigate the impact of this and bring more money into our district already to try and offset this impact. But we can only do it if we work collectively in a data-informed way. The other thing we're doing, in light of the aim to change those national pieces of research, is we have a survey out live now at the moment. And has everybody used a QR code before? Speaking to a very professional audience, so normally I get your cameras out now. But if you haven't yet, if you're a voluntary group and you haven't yet completed this survey, please do get your camera out and open it and do it later. Don't do it now. The QR code will just take you to the survey. It opened on Friday, and we already have 44 responses, which is already nearly the same amount that the national survey got for the East Midlands. So we're going to keep it open for another week at least. We want at least 100 responses, so we've got a solid data set for Bassetlaw. And then we have that baseline to go into wave 4 of the national research, and then they'll do the job for us, but we have the baseline. What the data is telling us already, as you'll see there, the answer to this question locally, has your position deteriorated financially? Yes, overwhelmingly yes. Not surprising, given everything we've just heard earlier today. Has demand increased? Increased a lot. Overwhelmingly, yes. You might not be able to see those, whatever they're called, labels. But the green slice and the blue slice is increased. So either increased a lot or increased a little. That's the overwhelming response. And with a bigger data set, that will help us bring more funding into our sector. Do you expect demand to increase? Again, same picture. And interestingly, this does mirror the national picture at the moment. But there's validity and value in the currency and locality this data affords. This one's about volunteering, and there's 35 questions in the survey. It's short, believe it or not, and it only takes an average of 9 minutes. Our monkey survey, Survey Monkey, which we use for this, will tell us all sorts of things, so it's a great piece of software. But what it's telling us is at least 40% of the organisations that have responded have got insufficient volunteers now to meet their service needs. So this is an area with other bits of our service and work we do, we support the sector with this. And there's various initiatives to try and grow the pipeline of volunteers, get more and diverse young volunteers into volunteering, because that's the national trend. Excuse me, sorry. A drop in the number of young volunteers and minority ethnic volunteers. This is probably the most troubling slide for me, because this mirrors the deficit budget issue that we see with individual citizens. And this shows that 40% of our local sector so far that have responded are now running on reserves. Most organisations can't and won't get into debt, governance won't allow it, so that may not become an issue, although actually we know for some it has, and that's led to them folding. What this means, this tells me really clearly what we're doing now isn't sustainable. So it's even more important that we use that data effectively, both to inform what we do with the limited resource we have, and also to bring in additional resource. And we're working really hard at BCVS, and we are committed to making sure we get money into the sector in Bassetlaw. And hopefully we've got some good news next week we can share with you, but I'm not allowed to say anything yet. I'm not looking at anybody. So yeah, we will keep doing that from a range of sources. I wanted to end on 3 hopefully more positive slides, because it's all very grim, isn't it? And I've actually hit on 15 minutes, sorry, so I failed to cut it shorter. So this is the result of the positive work that we all do collectively, and we've got many case studies as colleagues have also shared with you. That QR code will take you to the cost of living booklet, which my colleague Rachel, with all of you, put together last year. It was one of those things in the action plan that we said, what can we do now without additional resource? Let's just do it. And it is a fantastic reflection on the partners and the sector that we do that. We just move when we can. We do what we can with what we've got. And the cost of living booklet, along with support from Bassetlaw Action Centre, along with support from Oasis and many other organisations, was what this patient and citizen was provided with. And that is a QR code to that cost of living booklet, which we hope, sadly, it might be needed again. We'll repurpose, we'll update it, we'll get it out there again. And this is what she said. This patient. I feel so much lighter just being able to get it all off my chest, get all of my problems off my chest. Knowing someone is there to help me is such a relief. And that someone was probably 50 people, actually, across our sector, across the public sector, working together to make what difference we can for that person. So the ecosystem is not just our sector, it's working really closely with our public and health sector partners, and it's only because of that we can maximise the difference we can make. The last slide is just to come back to volunteers really, and this is a photo that was taken in here just a few weeks ago and reflects 12, or represents 12 volunteers from across 12 diverse voluntary organisations, and we met here to say thank you to them. It's so important that we stop, we recognise what they do for us, we value and reward what volunteers do for us all. And take a moment, really, within all of this chaos, within all of the challenges, to remember what a difference we are making. And it's important for our staff as well. So that was the slide I wanted to end on, because the stories under those volunteers there and the work they're doing is food bank volunteers, it's back volunteers and centre places, all sorts going on in there. That's what makes the difference. to our sector. Yes, we need the money. Yes, we will support you to bring more money in. Yes, we will try and maximise the impact and use of that data to do all of that. But the lifeblood of our sector is volunteers and volunteering. So we need to protect that and value it. And I know you all know that, so I'm preaching to the converted, but I just wanted to end on a good note. These are amazing people. They're supporting us now. And we'll look forward to working with you over the next year and many more years, another 50 I hope, we're in our 50th anniversary, to keep doing what we do better in Bassetlaw. So sorry for going over. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much, Andrea, and I'd just like to thank